the properties of water. And so we're going to talk about why water is basically magic and is essential for life on Earth. And so today we're going to be explaining how the properties of water that result from its polarity and hydrogen bonding affect its biological function. So again, remember, polarity means that it has a partial positive and a partial negative. The partial positive being on the hydrogen and the partial negative being on the oxygen. So oxygen is electronegative and hydrogen is electropositive. Before we get into the topic, let's talk about what are some roles that water plays in keeping organisms alive. So think about that question. Go ahead and pause that and share it with a partner nearby. And so I would have expected you guys to talk about transportation, how water can transport things, how water can regulate your temperature, how water is needed for chemical reactions or is a product of chemical reactions, how water can provide some structural support, how it can remove some waste, how it can deliver some nutrients to our body. And so our main topic and our main theme today is going to be hydrogen bonding and why hydrogen bonding gives water properties that help make life possible on Earth. And so this is due to the polarity that allows water to form hydrogen bonds, remember? And so again, water is polar. It has a partial negative. Oxygen is electronegative. And it has a partial positive, which is hydrogen. And so this polarity allows it to bond with other molecules. So what are some electronegative elements that you remember that water can hydrogen bond with? So what are the most electronegative elements? So think about the periodic table and think of the most electronegative elements. And you should have said either fluorine, oxygen, or nitrogen. So remember, when you're trying to memorize the most electronegative elements, remember the acronym FON. So fluorine, oxygen, nitrogen. All right? And so we're going to talk about later on in the video why hydrogen bonds are individually very weak, but collectively they're very strong. And so how does water support life on Earth? So let's start with the big picture of how water supports life on Earth, and then we're going to talk about a couple of mechanisms. But water is an important component in many chemical reactions, and that helps maintain homeostasis. Homeostasis is basically just a balance, all right? And so in another video, we're going to talk about hydrolysis reactions, which needs water to break down large molecules during digestion. So hydrolysis is the breaking down of molecules. Then we're going to talk about dehydration synthesis, which is going to remove water to build or make up large molecules. And we're also going to talk about metabolic reactions, which are biochemical processes that require water as a reactant or a product. And so water allows for the transport of materials in different organisms. So for example, in animals, blood is mostly water carrying nutrients, oxygen, hormones, and other waste products throughout the body. And in plants, water moves from roots to leaves through the xylem, and it carries dissolved minerals and nutrients. So all of these functions are only possible because of water's unique chemical properties. That all trace back to hydrogen bonding. So we're going to talk about that in a second. Before we get into that, let's talk about the structure of water. So again, we talked about how water is polar. It has partial positive and partial negative charges, and that's what allows for the hydrogen bonding, right? So you can see that oxygen is partially negative and hydrogen is partially positive. And so this polarity is what causes that bent structure you see. So because oxygen is electronegative, is it going to want to pull electrons towards itself, or is it going to want to give electrons? Think about that for a second. Something that's electronegative, is it going to want to pull electrons, or is it going to want to give electrons? And hopefully you said it wants to pull electrons towards itself, and that's what causes this bent molecule, right? And so this is the basis for hydrogen bonding. So you can see the hydrogen bonding right here. And so another thing you want to know is that water is held by these covalent bonds. And what a covalent bond is, if you don't remember from our last video, is when two atoms are sharing electrons, and energy is also stored in these covalent bonds. So you want to remember that water is has a polar covalent bond, right? All right, so let's get into let's get into chemical properties of water. So why is water uniquely suited to support life on Earth? Again, we talked about water being polar, has partial positive and partial negative charges. And this is due to its electronegativity differences, right? And so these partial charges on the poles attract to opposite charges on other molecules nearby. So you can see that there's water right here, right? H2O, two hydrogens and oxygen. It's going to attract to opposite charges, so oxygen over here. So they attract to opposite charges. And water polarity allows it to hydrogen bond with either other water molecules or other polar or charged molecules. So here you can see water being attracted and hydrogen bonding with other water molecules, right? And we're going to get into what these are called. And so these chemical properties allow water to exhibit cohesion and adhesion, have surface tension, resist temperature change, which is called high specific heat, and act as an excellent solvent, so it can dissolve chemicals. All right, and we said that water can hydrogen bond with other water molecules, or it can hydrogen bond with other polar or charged molecules, right? And so what cohesion is that when water molecules are attracted to and can hydrogen bond with other water molecules. So this is called cohesion. And here you can see that water is hydrogen bonding with other water. And so this is why water sticks together as a fluid and forms droplets on the surface. So that's why you could see, like, you could stack water on top of water, right? It's going to stick together and form a bigger droplet. And so we have something else called adhesion, which is when water molecules are attracted to and can hydrogen bond with other polar or charged molecules. So here you can see adhesion in this picture. So water is attracted to either a polar or charged molecule. So you could think about this, like, for example, if you have water on a test tube, you could see like little water droplets sticking to the test tube. And you see adhesion in that way. Or for example, when you put a tissue paper next to water, the water will naturally flow to the tissue, right? And so this is why water will adhere to other molecules and other surfaces, all right? And so we're gonna talk about how surface tension is directly caused by the fact that water is cohesive. So what surface tension is, it's like basically creating like a little skin on the water surface. So water molecules at the surface are surrounded by air, right? There's air near it on one side. So they hydrogen bond with fewer neighbors. And that makes the remaining bonds, the ones over here, very strong. And so it's going to resist being ruptured, right? So we have cohesion creating stronger bonds, and it's going to allow things like insects to walk on water, right? So if you're very, very, very tiny, you can imagine that you would be able to walk on water. All right, and we have something else called capillary action, which is basically water climbing up, like going all the way up to narrow tubes with either with polar or other charged molecules. All right, and so we're going to talk about why that's important for nature. All right, before we get into that, let's talk about surface tension in detail. So cohesion of water molecules at the surface of a body of water is what surface tension is. So again, remember that surface tension is directly caused by cohesion, which is water molecules hydrogen bonding with other water molecules, okay? And so basically, water molecules on the surface are surrounded by air on one side, like I explained, and on the because they hydrogen bond with fewer neighbors, the hydrogen bonds are stronger, right? So atoms on the surface are attracted to one side, and you could see them creating their surface tension right here. So here they're very, very, very attracted to each other. And so this allows water to have a defined surface and resist being ruptured by light objects, and allows them to float on the surface of the water. So here you can see a little bug being able to stand on water, basically. All right, and so again, let's go over cohesion and adhesion in detail. Remember that surface tension is directly caused by cohesion, because cohesion is when water can hydrogen bond with another water, and adhesion is when water can hydrogen bond with a polar or a charged molecule. Okay? All right, let's get into capillary action. We said that it's important for nature, right? So how? So water can adhere to the sides of the tubes that are lined in with polar or charged molecules. So here you can see that water sticks to the sides, right? And so the water molecules do not separate because of cohesion, and so this is called capillary action. So plants take advantage of capillary action to pull water from the roots all the way over here into their vascular tissue to transport it up to the leaves where photosynthesis can occur. And you could think about this, right? This is a crazy phenomenon because there's trees that are hundreds and hundreds of feet tall. And so water can move all the way up due to a process called capillary action. So let's break this down based on cohesion and adhesion. Remember, cohesion is when water molecules can hydrogen bond with other water molecules, and adhesion is when water molecules can hydrogen bond with polar or charged molecules, which in this case is the xylem cell wall. So because they're hydrogen bonding, water is sticking together, and because of the adhesion, it's being able to go all the way up. So remember that capillary action is due to adhesion and cohesion. All right, so we're going to talk about why water can resist temperature change, and this is something called high specific heat. So we're going to watch a quick video on hydrogen bonding in water.
Let's take a look at more water molecules, though, and see what happens. So here's a sample of a bunch of water molecules, and I'm going to put the hydrogen bonds in. And you can see how those hydrogen bonds, they form that network that really holds the water together.
All right, think about this right now. Water hydrogen bonding with other water, is that called adhesion or cohesion? So think about that.
Thinking of a glass of water, this would be throughout the entire sample. Next, let's give us some energy here. Let's take and put it right about room temperature and see what happens. So there they are. These are our water molecules, and they're all kind of holding together. If you look at any one water molecule, you'll see that the hydrogen bonds are breaking and forming, but they do stay kind of attached together. When we think about the properties of water, it's cohesive, there's surface tension, it has a higher boiling point than similar liquids that don't have hydrogen bonding. The hydrogen bonding has a lot to do with how water behaves. Let's heat this up and see what happens.
All right, so he already mentioned it, but yeah, water hydrogen bonding with other water is called cohesion, and now he's going to talk about something called high specific heat.
Take it up to that 800 degrees again. There we go. And you can see that when we do that, at 800 degrees, water is going to turn to steam. There's hydrogen.
All right, and so 800 degrees, is that a very high temperature or very low temperature?
Bonds just aren't strong enough to hold it together, and it spreads out and forms a gas. So one interesting thing that happens because of hydrogen bonds, when we have water that is frozen,
all right, and so now we're going to talk about what happens when water freezes.
It takes a regular pattern. These are crystals, and a lot of that has to do with our hydrogen bonds here and how the water molecules are lining up so the positive and negative sides can be pointing at each other. So you see the hydrogen bonds here in our crystal of water. This would be moving a little bit as well. These molecules would be moving around some.
And notice how hydrogen is taking up a lot of space when it's frozen.
It's a lot slower, though, because there's not as much energy there. This is Dr. B. I hope this video has helped you kind of visualize those hydrogen bonds. That they aren't quite as strong as ionic or covalent, but they're very important bonds, give a lot of properties to water and to other compounds that exhibit hydrogen bonding. Thanks for watching.
All right, and so like he said, hydrogen bonds are individually weak, but together they're very collectively strong. And so liquid water has lots of hydrogen bonds and are constantly breaking and reforming, but he said it took 100 degrees. So it takes a lot of energy to break all of these hydrogen bonds and causes them to evaporate, right? And so this is what causes water to resist temperature changes so well. And this is called high specific heat capacity. And so this is useful for a lot of living organisms because it helps maintain constant internal temperature for homeostasis. So you could think about our temperature on day-to-day life, right? Our temperature does change, but not drastically throughout, and that's because our body is made up of a lot of water, right? And so because our body is made up of a lot of water, our temperature remains relatively stable throughout the day. We're also going to talk about how that can affect other things like the lakes and things like that. But yeah, it helps us maintain a constant body temperature for homeostasis. So our internal, even though our external environment is changing, our internal environment is staying relatively stable. All right. And so again, we talked about high specific heat is the amount of heat it takes to raise 1 gram of water by 1 degree Celsius. So the amount of energy needed to raise the Celsius, right? And so this is important because the temperature of ocean remains relatively constant despite the constant temperature of air. So we said that our human bodies remain relatively stable, but so do bodies of water, right? So bodies of water, the temperature remains relatively constant and stable despite temperature changes on the external environment. All right. We're going to get into something called high heat of vaporization. And so water also has a high heat of vaporization, which means it takes a lot of energy to convert liquid water to gas because you need to break a lot of hydrogen bonds. So here you can see it takes 100 degrees Celsius for this liquid water to turn into vapor, and it requires a lot of heat. It requires a lot of energy. Why is this important? Because a lot of organisms rely on heat of vaporization to remove heat, and this is through something called evaporative cooling. So you could think of evaporated cooling, like for example, when you sweat, it's basically cooling you down through evaporating cooling, right? So you're sweating, that water is turning into vapor, and it's therefore cooling our body down. When you get out of the water, you feel very cold. Like when you just get out of a pool, you feel very cold. Dogs panting, so they need a lot of energy to cool down. So they're cooling themselves down. All right. Another property of water is that it's a solvent, right? And it wouldn't necessarily be called a universal solvent because it doesn't. It's not a solvent to all chemicals, but it's a solvent to most chemicals. So chemicals can dissolve in water, right? And so that's why it's an excellent solvent, because it's polar. And so a solvent is a substance that dissolves other chemicals. So you could think of, like, for example, when you're making Kool-Aid or something like that, it's a powder, but it's not going to remain a powder, right? It's going to dissolve into the water, and it's going to create a homogeneous mixture, and you're going to drink that Kool-Aid, right? And so remember, like dissolves like, so polar water dissolves polar substances and ions. All right, so that means that it's very good at pulling ionic compounds like salt apart into ions. So here you can see this molecule being pulled apart to form ions, right? And so ions are important because they are electrolytes. They are needed for life. And the process of this occurring is that basically water is going to create a hydration shell around ions. So you can see water over here creating a hydration shell. And so when ionic compounds like salt dissolve, water molecules surround each ion with a hydration shell. And so the partially negative oxygen atoms surround the positive ions, while the partially positive hydrogen atoms surround negative ions, all right, creating that shell. And so this is important because it allows blood to carry nutrients like hormones and waste products throughout our body. And so without this water solvent properties, transporting things on a cellular level would be impossible, right? Another thing that water can do is that it can also create a water shell around polar molecules that cannot ionize because they are held together by covalent bonds. So this could be seen in sugar, which we use for cellular respiration. All right. Another thing we're going to talk about is how water has lower density as a solid. So in the video, the guy mentioned when water freezes, right? You can see how water is expanding. So the hydrogen bonds form a crystal lattice. That's something he mentioned. And it's a structure that takes up more space than liquid waters when it's constantly breaking and reforming bonds, right? So that makes it less dense as a solid than it is as a liquid. And that's why that's why ice floats. So usually more substances are denser when solid, but because of the expansion, it's allowing it to be less dense as a solid. And this is important for life because if ice sank, then the lakes and oceans would freeze from the bottom up, and eventually they'd be solid all year round. So instead, you see ice forming an insulating layer on top and protecting the wildlife before, right? So none of the wildlife is freezing to death. And again, this creates oceans and lakes to not freeze. And it allows there to be an insulation and there to be a seasonal turnover of lakes and oxygen cycling. So even though it's being very cold, oxygen could still cycle throughout the lake. All right, we're going to talk about ionization of water and how it can be a buffer. And so basically, water can split hydrogen and hydroxyl ions through ionization. So the concentration of hydrogen ions determines the pH. So you can see right here, if hydrogen, the same amount of hydrogen and hydroxyl atoms are in water, then that means water is neutral. If there's more hydrogen atoms than hydroxyl, then the water is acidic. And if there's less hydrogen atoms than hydroxyl, then water is basic. So you can see that on a scale right here. So the more acidic something is, the lower the number. And the more basic something is, the higher the number. Again, something being very acidic has a lot of hydrogen. All right. And so on a pH scale, 1 through 7 is acidic, 7 being neutral, and 7 through 14 is more basic. All right. And so how is it a buffer, or why are buffers important? So our cells need a pH of around 7.4 to function properly. So even small changes in pH can denature our proteins. So we're going to talk about that in our protein video, our structure and protein video, but it can disrupt cellular processes. So basically, living things use a buffer system to maintain a stable pH. So what buffers do is that they resist pH changes by either absorbing excess hydrogen ions or releasing them as needed. So for example, in bicarbonate, you could see that the more acidic something is, you have more hydrogen, right? Sorry, more hydrogen. And so basically, when your pH is too acidic, you want to remove hydrogen to raise your pH to a more neutral, neutral charge of 7.4. When your blood is too basic, then you want to release hydrogen to lower your pH. And so conditions could be called acidosis and alkalosis, which are dangerous. This is when your blood pH goes outside of the normal range. All right, let's talk about acid precipitation. So acid precipitation is due to changing water chemistry globally, and acid precipitation forms when sulfur and nitrogen oxides dissolve in the atmospheric water. So you could think about how that could damage a lot of ecosystems. Like for example, ocean acidification that's caused due to a lot of excess CO2 in our atmosphere, which goes into our water. And so before we thought it wasn't a big deal because like all of our carbon dioxide is going to our water, it's not staying in our atmosphere, so that must be good, right? But no, because when the ocean acidifies, that's causing coral reefs to not grow. It's causing anything with a shell to not grow properly because the shell gets very, very thin and fragile and it breaks. So any shell-forming organism isn't able to survive in the ocean. All right? And that's all about it. That water's polarity is directly responsible for its ability to hydrogen bond. All right, so because it can hydrogen bond with other water molecules and or other charged or polar molecules that are nearby. So what do you think is the ability for water to hydrogen bond with other water molecules? Is that cohesion or adhesion? That should have been cohesion. And so the opposite can be said. So water being able to hydrogen bond with charged or polar molecules is called adhesion, all right? And so water's polarity and hydrogen bond are directly responsible for its ability to support living systems. So through cohesion and adhesion, which together allows for capillary action and surface tension. Remember, capillary action is the ability to transport water molecules upwards, all right? And surface tension is the ability to create strong hydrogen bonds together and resist being ruptured, all right? Water also has solvency, so its ability to dissolve polar compounds, so it can dissolve some chemicals. And it can resist temperature changes because it's going to take a lot of energy. And that's all about it. You want to do these practice problems, and I'll do a separate